Hey everyone, Ethan here. Much like my previous video, this is a follow-up to my videos about Pokemon Yellow and Pokemon Red and Blue. If you haven't seen those videos, I highly recommend watching them first. If you did see those videos, you probably know by now how much I love Pokemon. I received my copy of Leafgreen for my 8th birthday alongside a Pokemon-themed green lunchbox and an ancient Mew card. I don't have the best memory, but I'm pretty sure Firered and Leafgreen were the second set of Pokemon games I ever played. Before I get into exactly what Firered and Leafgreen are, I need to explain the concept of generations when it comes to Pokemon. Generations are so intertwined with Pokemon that if you've dabbled in playing, you've probably heard this term before. Generations in Pokemon refers to each time period from mainline games to the next. For example, Generation 1 of Pokemon began when Pokemon Red and Green released in 1996 in Japan. This generation's games took place in Kanto and introduced 151 Pokemon. Generation 2 started with Pokemon Gold and Silver's release in 1999 in Japan, which took place in the Johto region and introduced 100 new Pokemon. Generation 3 of Pokemon kicked off in 2002 with the release of Ruby and Sapphire, primarily taking place in the Hoenn region and introducing 135 new Pokemon. This is the generation we're going to be mainly talking about as Firered and Leafgreen released during this generation. Firered and Leafgreen were the first proper remakes in the Pokemon series, aiming to remake the journey through Kanto with updated graphics and music, adding quality of life features added in the two generations since the originals, and brand new content. Generation 2 of Pokemon allowed you to transfer your Gen 1 Pokemon back and forth from Red, Blue, and Yellow to Gold, Silver, and Crystal. However, when Ruby and Sapphire released with Gen 3, due to several changes to the Pokemon themselves like different movesets and how stats are distributed and calculated, Pokemon from Gen 1 and 2 were cut off and unable to be transferred to Gen 3 games and later. For this reason, several Pokemon from the two previous generations were unobtainable in the newer games. This seems to be a big reason as to why these games came to be, apart from making tons of money. Being that they were made almost 10 years after the originals, Firered and Leafgreen came with lots of quality of life additions and changes that made the experience this time around a bit different. While I usually dive somewhat deep into these mechanics, I instead feel it's more fitting to save the longer explanations for the games those mechanics were introduced in, and simply give them a passing mention here. Starting with the player character themselves, there's two things that make things a lot more convenient. One of which is the running shoes item, which gets you wherever you're going faster and is obtained very early on. The other is that your bag is now split into 3 sections, making items much easier to find and allowing for more items to be stored overall. Now onto the Pokemon themselves, they've seen a lot of small changes accumulating into making each individual Pokemon more unique. All Pokemon now have genders, natures, abilities, and held items. Gender usually doesn't affect much unless the move Attract is used or you want to breed your Pokemon, which I'll go into briefly in a bit. Natures basically gives your Pokemon a stat that they excel in, while giving them a different stat they're not so great in. Abilities give each species of Pokemon an extra passive skill that can aid them in and sometimes even outside of battle. Pokemon can now also hold items, which can have a variety of different applications in battle. Speaking of which, battling has received some facelifts as well, like the addition of the Steel and Dark types. Although this isn't a huge change for these remakes, and the only Pokemon to retroactively get either of these types is the Magneton evolution line becoming part Steel, while Dark is really only seen through moves like Bite and Thief. The special stat is now Special Attack and Special Defense, which is pretty self-explanatory. Next up, pretty much every Pokemon now has a much wider and more diverse move pool, allowing most to now learn some moves outside of their own type plus normal. Finally, sometimes you'll run into trainer duos that'll challenge you to double battles, which is just 2-on-2 on the field at once. These changes may potentially sound overwhelming or too much at first, but in reality they're all minor enough to the point that they can be ignored without much consequences or capitalized on if you're interested, which in my opinion is the way to go. Also, just look how much faster they made the spin tiles. They were so annoyingly slow in Gen 1. With all of that out of the way, I could finally get into what makes Firered and Leafgreen unique. The game's main goal was to be more of a take on Red and Blue, not Yellow. That means any content added or changed in Yellow, which admittedly wasn't much, is forgotten about this time around. Your starter is back to being either Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle, Team Rocket doesn't have Jessie, James, or Meowth, etc. Not only do the games do a great job on accomplishing this, but also adds brand new content. Once you beat the Cinnabar Island gym, you'll be greeted by Bill taking you on a boat to the new Sevi Isles. Like the name implies, this new area consists of 7 islands which the game mainly refers to by their number, although each island does have their own unique name. Upon traveling there for the first time, you have access to islands 1, 2, and 3, where you can complete a side quest for Bill's friend Celio. Completing the side quest will grant you access to 2 minigames that can only be played using the Game Boy wireless adapter, so I didn't get the opportunity to try them. While the islands aren't that big, there's still quite a bit of new stuff to find and do. This seems to serve the purpose of having a gap where you can train between the 7th and 8th gym, while also getting you ready for the post-game content. Upon beating the Pokemon League, you'll be greeted by Professor Oak, asking how many Pokemon you've caught in your Pokedex, and that's it. If you haven't caught 60 unique species yet. Whether you caught that much before or after he greets you, upon talking to him, he'll upgrade your and your rival's Pokedexes to the National Dex, which gives you the ability to register every Pokemon that currently existed at that point in time, being 386. As a quick aside, when I beat the Pokemon League, I could not figure out how I was supposed to start the post-game. The only hint you're given is Oak coming to check your Pokedex, but even then, if you don't have 60 or more Pokemon caught, then he'll just walk away. Either way, once you go back to one island, you'll receive another side quest from Celio, eventually taking you to islands 4 through 7. You'll even run into Team Rocket along the way. The quest has you finding 2 gems, the Ruby and Sapphire, which will give you the ability to trade Pokemon back and forth from not only the other mainline Gen 3 titles being Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, but also the GameCube spin-off games Colosseum and XD Gale of Darkness. The final step in this quest involves you retrieving the Sapphire from puzzling ruins that have their solutions inscribed in Braille. Originally, the game manual for these and the other mainline Gen 3 games came with a chart to decode the Braille. Unfortunately, getting your hands on these manuals today would not be easy or convenient, but thankfully the internet has you covered. Getting back to the islands, 4 through 7 will start introducing you to Pokemon native to the Johto region, which were introduced in Gen 2. You'll not only see them used by trainers, but some can also be encountered in the wild. It really seems like, much like these remakes themselves, the Sevi Isles were at least partially created to give players access to the Gen 2 Pokemon in Gen 3 and later games. It is also here where you're able to breed your Pokemon, which essentially allows you to get rare Pokemon like the starters or Eevee without having to restart your entire game. I really like how they went out of their way to make sure that you could, in some way, shape, or form, still catch them all, even if you have to pay an arm and a leg to do so. Also, to keep you busy, located on 7 Island is the Trainer Tower. Trainer Tower is a facility that allows you to battle a gauntlet of trainers in 4 different formats at a set level. This facility today is commonly known as the Battle Tower. However, Trainer Tower itself has a unique format that sets it apart from its other incarnations. While the other battle towers are more focused on sustaining the growing difficulty, Trainer Tower is more so built around completing each format as fast as possible. To add to the time, your Pokemon retain any damage, status, and PP lost after each battle. On the flip side though, you're able to use items in battle, which is very uncommon for these types of battle facilities. You can also run downstairs and heal at the makeshift Pokemon Center if you please, but obviously it'll cost you time. Each format has 8 floors to get through, and upon reaching the top, you'll receive an item dependent on the format. You can also get the items as many times as you'd like. The 4 formats are Singles, which has 1 single battle per floor, Doubles, which has 1 double battle per floor, Knockout, which is 3 single battles, one right after the other per floor, and lastly there's Mix, which is just a combination of the 3 formats split across the 8 floors. While the Sevi Isles post-game is easily the biggest addition to Firered and Leafgreen, there are a handful of other smaller additions that are either introduced in these games or are exclusive to them. The first of which being the help system, which provides useful, albeit broad information about your current situation. Even though this feature seems so trivial, it can go a long way with helping new or inexperienced players. Going along with optional tutorial features is the Teachy TV, which when used allows you to watch some of the basics of Pokemon. There's also the Previously On feature that, upon booting up your save file, will show you a few notable things you last did, which is fantastic if you're quite forgetful or haven't played in a while. Next is another small addition that never appeared again, being the Fame Checker. Its purpose is to give some additional information on key characters like the gym leaders, your rival, professor, and so on. You can get more information on them by talking to them, specific NPCs, and even some objects. I'm not sure why, but as a kid I was fascinated by this specific item and felt obligated to complete it, even though I never got close. The last and easily the biggest original addition these games introduced was the Versus Seeker. The Versus Seeker allows you to rematch almost any trainer throughout the entire region. As you progress through the game, some trainers will even get stronger, making leveling up much easier than it was in RBY. Going into my playthrough of Leafgreen, I was quite excited since I had quite fond memories of these games, so the Pokemon on my team would be more to my liking than usual. My team was made up of Lunchbox the Venusaur, Scribble the Raichu, Dan Zippy the Hitmonlee, Probable the Poliwrath, Scubby the Rhydon, and Drago the Dragonite. I had a lot of fun using this team and it's probably my favorite team I've used so far. Although in hindsight it probably wasn't the best idea to have 3 team members that are all weak to Psychic, practically 4 since Rhydon cannot speed anything and dies to 1 special hit anyway. Psychic may be less powerful in this compared to the originals, but it still very much reigns supreme. Thank you to Lunatium for suggesting Raichu's wonderful nickname, and I hope you don't mind me repurposing Scubby for Rhydon. Also, thank you to 3 Days Grace 751 for Dragonite's name, and Colin Coyle for Hitmonlee's. When it comes to the difficulty, these games differ a bit due to all the changes from the originals. Psychic and Normal are no longer the titans they used to be, although Psychic is still the best type by a decent margin. Psychic now has to worry about a few half-decent bug moves instead of like 3 bad ones. Plus, while there are no dark types usable in the region, there are a handful of moves that have a wide variety of coverage. In addition, Ghost can actually hit Psychic now and also has some good moves to do so with. And if that wasn't enough, due to the special stat split, most Psychic types now specialize in one of the 2 special stats instead of both. Normal's only real nerf is that fighting moves are better and more common on non-fighting types. Pretty much every trainer battle is at least slightly more difficult due to better move pools and better AI. Unfortunately, since these are remakes, they decided not to change any trainer's team composition. As you could probably tell, I feel like this is a missed opportunity. However, they did actually decide to change the Elite Fours and Champions teams upon rematching them. Speaking of which, these are easily the most difficult games so far. I lost to the first rival fight, which is just whatever, but I almost lost to Sabrina, and lost to Lorelei once, and the champion twice. And if that wasn't bad enough, that was just before the post-game, as upon rematching the Elite Four, I lost to Agatha, then Lorelei, then the champion, then Lance, then leveled up a little, and lost one more time to Lance before finally winning. I originally thought that this would be frustrating, but instead it felt sort of invigorating. Beating the Elite Four, and especially the champion, felt kind of like a puzzle. I knew I had the right pieces, after leveling everyone up to level 63, I just needed to figure out where each of them went. When I finally defeated the champion, I felt super accomplished and satisfied. I will say that I was about 10 levels below the champion's team when I won, and had already spent a few hours on grinding, but I'll give these post-game battles a bit of a pass since they're more so on the optional side. As far as I know, Firered and Leafgreen are generally bug-free. At the very least, they're infinitely more solid than their predecessors. However, there is one bug I want to point out that could potentially hurt any person playing that just wants themselves a legendary Pokemon. Once you complete the Team Rocket post-game storyline, one of 3 legendary beasts from Johto will start roaming Kanto for you to encounter and catch. The beast is dependent on which starter you picked. Suicune for Charmander, Raikou for Squirtle, and in my case, Entei for Bulbasaur. They are meant to be encountered more than once and will flee the first chance they get, but will retain any damage or status that you inflict on them, much like your party. Two of the three beasts, Entei and Raikou, have the move Roar, when, if used in a wild Pokemon battle, will force you out of the battle much like fleeing. The bug comes in with how the game handles the move Roar. I guess the game considers the battle to be finished, which means that if the beast uses it, they'll disappear forever. Because of this issue, I would highly recommend saving your Master Ball for this occasion. There are a few issues I have with either these games, the Kanto games as a whole, or Pokemon games in general. Generations 2 and 3 introduce many new Pokemon, some of which are evolutions of Generation 1 Pokemon, like Crobat evolving from Golbat and Blissey from Chansey. However, you cannot obtain these Pokemon until you obtain the National Dex, even if you meet that Pokemon's evolution requirement. The Pokemon will even try to evolve, but will stop just before it actually does, telling you that it couldn't for some reason. This is easily the dumbest decision made about these games, making players miss out on 11 potential options/evolutions. Thankfully, most future remakes remedied this issue. Next up, I want to talk about events. Since Generation 1, Game Freak would hold in-game events where for a limited time you could travel to a real-life location to receive a Pokemon. This was the only way to obtain the mythical Pokemon Mew in Generation 1, Celebi in Generation 2, and several Pokemon in Generation 3. Firered and Leafgreen contain events which unlock exclusive locations for 3 Pokemon: Lugia and Hoa at Naval Rock, and Deoxys at Birth Island. This event is the only way to obtain Deoxys at all this generation, and is the only way to obtain Ho-Oh and Lugia outside of the recently mentioned GameCube titles. Every generation has contained at least one Pokemon that's locked behind some sort of event, and I kind of hate it. I don't think Pokemon should ever be time-gated and should have some sort of in-game way to obtain them. The next issue I want to tackle is something that's been an issue since Red and Blue, and was not rectified in these games. There are 4 different Pokemon that could only be obtained through in-game trades, which on its own is perfectly fine. I actually like the idea of having several different ways of obtaining Pokemon. However, these Pokemon come with nicknames, and since you aren't the original owner of these Pokemon, you cannot change it. I know this seems like a small issue, but I feel an easy solution would have just been to either make it so that you can nickname traded Pokemon, or make these Pokemon available rarely in an area found after the place where the in-game trade is. Funnily enough, Yellow did the bare minimum and made 2 of the 4 Pokemon available in the wild, and Firered and Leafgreen reverted them back to being in-game trades only. The last issue is that version exclusives got a little worse, with each version not only keeping most of their exclusives from Red and Blue, with the only exceptions being the Mankey and Meowth line being available in both versions, but now Fire Red gets both the Psyduck and Shelter line, and Leaf Green gets the Staryu and Slowpoke line. I guess it's slightly better in a way because Kanto isn't exactly hurting for water types, but less Pokemon is never a good option. Also, both versions each have their own exclusive Johto Pokemon in the postgame, but those aren't that important to me. Also, before I move on, Leaf Green is the better version. No contest, fight me, please, I dare you. Even if I lose, Leaf Green is still better. In terms of graphics, Fire Red and Leaf Green take RBY's graphics and upgrade them to 16-bit, and has its own unique art style that sets them apart from both the originals and the other Gen 3 titles. I'm not sure why, but I've always loved how these games look more than I should. The sprites especially are fantastic. I would say that I prefer this art style to the Hoenn games. The music has also been upgraded using the GBA sound font. Interestingly enough, before replaying Leaf Green, I always much preferred the original soundtrack to the remakes due to not liking how some of the tracks were handled. While that did remain true for some tracks lacking the oomph that the RBY versions had, I found myself being surprised by how much I enjoyed some of the tracks I previously didn't like much. They even added new tracks for battling legendary Pokemon, Mewtwo, and also reimagined some tracks from Gold and Silver for the Sevi Isles. My favorite track is probably the end credits theme, because wow, that song got a huge upgrade. My biggest gripe is that some songs, like the track that plays when you're inside of a gym, are just reused from Ruby and Sapphire. Thankfully though, this isn't common at all. Pokemon Firered and Leafgreen were released in North America in 2004 on the Game Boy Advance. Like I've mentioned before, Pokemon games are weird. Firered and Leafgreen are remakes of Red and Blue, but not Yellow. Firered and Leafgreen themselves have only ever been released once. No virtual console releases here, unfortunately. That means if you want a copy of one of these two games, you'll have to go looking at places that sell retro games. You can find them costing you on average anywhere between $20 to $80 US. As a small disclaimer though, in my experience, Generation 3 and 4 games sold on websites like eBay have a decent chance of being fake copies, so be careful. As always though, until Nintendo get their head on straight and let their endless back catalog of games be made available on newer hardware, there's a quicker, safer, and better way of playing these games. However, if you do manage to get a real physical copy, you're actually able to transfer your Pokemon all the way up to modern Pokemon games as long as you have the necessary hardware and software. As a quick reminder before I rank these games, I count Firered and Leafgreen as one game because they practically are. Now as for ranking Firered and Leafgreen, I had quite a tough time deciding if I preferred them over one game specifically, but finally came to a conclusion. Firered and Leafgreen are being placed in the number 3 slot just above Pikmin. The reason I'm singling out Pikmin specifically is because I was torn on which should be placed higher than the other. However, I think Firered and Leafgreen just barely takes the cake. As for why the remakes are much higher than both Yellow and Red and Blue, the answer comes down to them aging much better. The combination of the new content, quality of life changes from being 2 generations later, looking much better than the original, being able to see more than 2 colors, being much more balanced and challenging at the same time. I could go on, but you get it at this point. Here's most of my team for my next video on Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. If you have any nicknames to suggest, the comment section is just the place for you. Thank you all so much for watching. I apologize for any potential hiccups or errors that you may find in this video. This is my first video using new video editing software and there are bound to be some growing pains. Which of the Generation 1 starters is your favorite? Mine is pretty obvious. I appreciate and look forward to any feedback you may have. Please make sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, comment whatever thoughts you may have, and share it if you wouldn't mind. Thanks again, and I hope to see you again soon.
Pokemon's difficult.
Lives?
Game Freak.
So showed us of his death. Are you not angered? No. I feel invigorated.